You are listening to the Tilted Lawyer Podcast, a show that inspires the legally challenged to enter the courtroom armed with a plan. I'm Omar Serrato, owner of the Eagle Law Firm, experienced litigator, and the man you want to talk to before your big case. My co-host is Iliana Clone Rosa, owner of Clone Rosa Law, and a rising star in Southern California.
And welcome, everybody, to episode 14 of the Tilted Lawyer Podcast. It's a pleasure to be with you in our new makeshift studio, also known as the Eagle Law Firm conference room, previously used for multiple depositions. And today we're using it to record our show. This is an evolving studio. It's going to not always look like this. What you see right here is literally just a random amalgamation of my idea of what I thought a studio should look like. This lighting here, these lights, the idea was that they're supposed to flicker like a flame, like the like our logo, the flaming voice of reason. I don't know, our logo, but we did the flame effect, and Jocelyn said it doesn't really work.
No. It didn't look like a flame.
Well, so now it's just orange. It could be any color, red, purple. Mm-hmm. I was also advised that I should get a ring light. So maybe we'll do that next time. Who knows? Also, on the way, we're going to have multiple camera angles at some point, so we could get everybody on camera and we could switch between speakers and that kind of stuff. But for right now, I got to say, I was just telling Melissa the other day about how this podcast has grown. Mm-hmm. And the very first episode that we had recorded never actually made it onto YouTube. Oh. Because the video was so bad. We were literally recording a Zoom session between the two of us, and then it cut us off at 30 minutes because we were using the free one. And so we had to log back in. And I don't even know what mics we were using, but we're using some kind of mics. The audio of that podcast is actually up. I haven't listened to it because I don't want to see how bad it is. And
the second one, I didn't talk for half of it because my audio cut off.
Yeah, I do remember that, your audio cutting off. And just so you guys know, we are now completely independent recording into the PC because Riverside has kicked us off. Which is the reason why I had us recording on 3 different sources. So this is our first completely independent recording, which I'm very proud to say. It just so happens, usually when I take on things, I happen to have Asperger's, which is the big joke that I always say when the wife is like, "Hey, you're kind of being an asshole right now." I was like, "Well, I have a condition, so
don't judge.
I am excused. I have Asperger's, and I think you should be more sensitive to my needs." Sometimes it works. Oftentimes it doesn't. At any rate, here we are. We do have a wonderful show planned for you today. We are going to talk a little bit about the Darrell Brooks case and his sovereign citizen defense, which he is attempting to use to get him out of the 60-plus felony counts, including 6 counts of first-degree murder that he's facing in Wisconsin. He's been representing himself. They're into week 3 of trial. Today, the people just rested in that case, and Mr. Brooks had elected to wait until the presentation of his case to give opening statements. So the opening statements have been staggered. The prosecution has presented their opening statements. They presented all of their witnesses, and they rested today. And when you do it that way, the way that Mr. Brooks has, he gets to open with his opening remarks at the beginning of his case, and that's what he's chosen to do. You typically, what do you think about that strategy? If you're sitting on a jury and you just get through the entire prosecution case, and they spend 3 weeks presenting their case, and now they're resting, and you're feeling like it's, all right, over, now this guy. And now somebody wants to bring in an opening statement. How would you guys feel about that? I'm curious.
What? Annoyed.
Well, the reason why I even bring it up is because there is it's well-known trial strategy to not do that. You want to give your opening statement when they give their opening statement because first impressions matter. Mm. Okay. And the jury has had 3 weeks of Mr. Brooks being slammed with evidence showing that he ran over and murdered 6 people and injured dozens of others. And evidence is coming. Gosh, he's doing so bad in this trial. He needs an attorney in the worst way. Yes. And as an example, one of the things that you're not allowed to do in a criminal trial, or any trial, rather, is you're not allowed to introduce evidence that is not relevant to the causes of action or to the charges. And even if you do, it has to not be so prejudicial that it would color the jury's vision of you and give them a tendency to rule against you, despite whatever evidence might be. So one of the pieces of evidence that was ruled on in pre-trial motions was they weren't going to bring up the fact that Mr. Brooks had been charged and convicted. I actually don't know if he was convicted or not, but he was definitely charged with domestic violence against his girlfriend. They weren't going to bring in the fact that he was seen arguing with his girlfriend on the day that he took his car and ran it through that Christmas parade, killing so many others, because it was going to be viewed as, we don't need to do all of that. The issue is, did he drive this car recklessly into a crowd of people and kill people? That's the relevant discussion. If we bring in evidence that he committed acts of domestic violence, the ruling was that it would tend to distract the jury and cause them to have a prejudicial view of Mr. Brooks, making it more difficult for him to get a fair trial. So they've took great care to keep any instance or any piece of evidence or any piece of testimony that would go into whether or not he committed such acts. And Mr. Brooks, being a pro per and representing himself and questioning these witnesses, opens the door to all of that talk, all of that discussion, to the point where, okay, well, obviously everybody's going to know that you're a woman batterer, and that the whole reason behind him driving into that crowd was because he got in an argument with his girlfriend. So if you guys are unfamiliar with the case, let me just paint the picture. It was December last year, 2021, in Wisconsin. They have a state county parade for Christmas, where there's Christmas floats and Christmas music, and they had the dancing grannies, and they had the local youth teams, sports teams joining in on the parade. I was part of one when I was like 11. My little football team, we were marching with everybody, and it was a local community event. But obviously, they shut down the street, and everybody's having a good time. I don't remember if it was on Christmas Day or if it was on Christmas Eve. All I know is that's the setting. It's very festive. There's floats. There's Christmas music. Everybody's in a festive mood. And here comes Mr. Darrell Brooks driving a red SUV at high rates of speed. And if you've ever been to downtown LA during a sporting event, imagine all of these people in the streets and on the sidewalks, and the streets are shut down. That's what he drove into. And he rams his car into dozens of people, and as a result of him doing that, killed 6 people in the process. The people that were murdered among them were one member of the Dancing Grannies. I think she was 52 years old. There was a lot of elderly folks. The youngest victim was an 8-year-old boy who was there as part of his baseball team, and he was murdered by this man. After the accident, he fled the scene, left his car, and started running through random neighborhoods to hide. And he made communication with several residences, people that lived in those residences, and they've testified in this trial. Well, yeah, you were obviously the guy in the car. You're the guy that I talked to. And he was hiding. They actually, when they arrested him, he was hiding in a backyard playhouse for children, like a dollhouse or a treehouse. He was hiding in there, and that's how he was found. And then he was arrested and brought in for questioning. And that's the story of the Waukesha killings. That's what this trial is all about. So for a solid 9 months, they've been litigating this case. They began the trial about 3 weeks ago, and he made the decision to represent himself. We talked about this a little bit last week. He had the public defender assisting him, and I can't even imagine what kind of nightmare that was like. Iliana, what's the most difficult client you've ever had to represent? I mean, obviously don't say names, but like just a hypothetical.
Yes.
I think maybe 3 clients come to mind, and for different reasons. I will say one of them, I think there were some mental issues that involved where they needed help and they were just not getting it. And of course, it was damaging their case. Another one was maybe one that she was just too upset that she just wanted to say the opposite of everything that the other guy was saying, even if it was a benefit to her. Like, for example, opposing party agreed to attorney fees. Well, she said, no, I don't want the attorney fees to come from that account. I want them from this other account, because he doesn't get to say from which account is coming. Well, the other account didn't have any money, so she ended up with no attorney fees.
Wow.
And the other client, I don't know, he just didn't want to follow instructions completely.
He didn't want to follow instructions. Oh, yeah, one of those.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, like, it was, I don't know, they're the worst when they don't listen to you, and at the same time, they want you to help them, and it's like they don't help themselves. They don't allow you to help them because they just think that they're doing better.
Yeah.
Or they just think that whatever the neighbor or the friend told them, it's a better strategy than what you're telling them. So
I'm going to need you to try to lean into the microphone. It was not picking you up very well. Yeah, I've had clients. Well, the most difficult recent client, it was just one that was, I don't know if mental issues was the right characterization of her. I just think that she was going through a very emotional divorce. And we spent months crafting a global settlement. And she was prepared to blow it up because she wanted $15 a month for child support, not even spousal support, for child support. And despite the fact that they were already offering to pay above guideline support, and then it got to the point where it's like, I don't even know what to say anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. You know, I'm like apologizing to the other attorneys, like,
Wow.
yeah, exactly. When
I can't force her.
To the other one, you know it's bad when you're apologizing to the other one, because it happened to me and that lady that she's like, but why? Like, we're offering to pay. Why are you not accepting? I'm like, well, the only thing that I can tell you is she wants it from this account and not the other one. That's it. And, well, there's nothing in that account. And I explained to my client, and nope.
Yeah, no, man. I'll tell you what, we were able to salvage that judgment. Okay. And then after the fact, because we just put it on the record because we needed to get out of there, we're there all day. And then after the fact, she refused to sign it.
Of course.
No.
Of course.
And so she refused to sign the judgment. And, you know, notwithstanding that we had read it into the record and she was warned that this is going to be binding or enforceable. And at any rate, the judge signed it without her signature.
Okay.
And I withdrew from the case. And I wished her a lot of luck. It's an example of, gosh, you got to be careful sometimes with who you represent.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know?
That is true.
And the thing is, I'm sure she was a good person and all, but sometimes when you're going through those kinds of things, it's tough to be level-headed in those scenarios. And it's funny because I would always have her in my office, and then we would talk, and she would be fine, and she would agree. Mm-hmm. As soon as she saw that guy, forget it.
Yes.
Forget it. She
That's
just turned into
exactly.
something else.
No, I felt like I was dealing with a child in court because she was even making faces to the other party while we were on the hallway. And I'm like trying to calm her down, trying to talk to her, and she's just like going around me doing faces. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, he's doing faces to me. I'm like, no, stop it. That was so horrible. I mean, I ended up, of course, not continuing with the case, but it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
It was a nightmare.
I represented a couple of legitimately mentally ill folks before. I think I told you about those. One of them was in Riverside, and it was a client that was accused of a sexual assault of young boys that she was watching. And it was one of the saddest cases that I've ever had because, like, this dad, her father, this lady was probably, I want to say, in her 40s at the time. And I must have been 33-ish, 34 maybe, 35. But she was older, and her dad was the one that requested us to come and represent her. And so I did. It was at that firm that you and I formerly worked for. And so, of course, I was taking on all of those hearings and going to do all of the jail visits. But her dad would come in to talk, and he would talk with me. He was probably in his 70s, approaching 80. He looked like he should just be like winding down in retirement somewhere, but he was just like heartbroken over this case, and he wanted to get his daughter out because, and it was one of these cases where they couldn't really proceed because of her competency issues. And then I would go to visit her at the jail. I was suspicious of this lady, that she was not actually mentally ill. I felt like it was a show. Yeah. Like we would get into court, and I would talk to her, and she would have these lucid moments where it's like I'm talking to somebody, but then she would like go into this caricature of what she believed a schizophrenic person would be,
Yes.
And she would perform that way for the court. And they, of course, accused her of malingering her mental illness. And inevitably, I don't know what happened because the dad could not afford representation going forward. But in one of the jail visits during the day, so I was in Riverside Court. After my court appearance in Riverside, I went to go visit her across the street. And she came out of her cell. I mean, the holding the jail visit, like the windows, like the structure. I don't know what floor you go on, but you got to go upstairs, and you're sitting in there. And then she starts like talking to me about like all of her sexual encounters in the jail, and then she started undressing herself. And I had to say, "Hey, guard."
Oh my God.
I think you might want to come get this one.
More usual.
That was the last time I ever saw her. It wasn't, not because of that. I think it was just, that was the end of representation. We couldn't really do much more for her. But I remember that case. It was interesting. There was one psychological report that said that she was competent. There was another one that said that she was vastly sick, and we needed a tiebreaker. And the tiebreaker was inconclusive. And then it's like, after all of that, now what? Now what? Okay, let's get a fourth opinion. Why don't we just make it a fifth? And then the judge's like, I tried to give you guys an odd number, and they came back with a tie anyway. So I love that judge, though. That judge had a lot of patience. She was the one judge at the time for that whole dealing with all of the mental health issues in the criminal courts. So there was that client. There was another client that I had that I told you about. It was the murder case up in Paris. I think I told you about that case. I told them about the case for sure, about how he had lured this young man who was in his 20s. I guess there was some young girl that was staying with him and his girlfriend. The girl couldn't have been older than 18, 19 years old. But they found her, I believe that she was homeless. And then she was taken in by this couple who practiced satanic rituals and all kinds of stuff.
Oh, yes. I think you mentioned something.
Yeah. And so they lured him in with the promise of, hey, you got to come over. We're going to have a good time. We could have a threesome, and we could do all of this stuff, and it's going to be great. And then the guy's like, hell yeah. And so he jumps in his car, and he drives up the mountain to Paris. It's not in the mountains, is it? It's near like a lake. Yeah. But he goes up into this rural-looking area, and upon he parks, and it's in this, the property was like maybe 2 acres large. It was like this house, a small house in this large swath of land. They had a fire pit in the middle. I guess you would call it the backyard. He walks into the house, And the guy that would have been my client and this other guy brutally murdered that man.
Wow.
There was blood on the ceilings. There was blood in the kitchen. There was blood in the living room. There was blood in the bedrooms. They pulverized his skull, brain matter all over the place. And then they attempted to discard the body by throwing it in the fire pit and cremating him, not understanding that that's not how cremation works.
Oh my God.
So I went to visit this guy in jail. I don't remember where we were. It couldn't have been Rancho. It must have been
If it happened in Paris, then it was probably
like out in
Marietta?
out in Marietta. I think it must have been Marietta.
Yes.
Yeah, where I did the jail visit with him. And he was telling me that I'm innocent and all of the stuff. And I said, okay, it's fine that you're telling me that. I just want you to know this is what the police have on you. And we talked about the evidence. And, they stole the guy's car and tried to sell it to a third party.
On top of that.
Yeah, afterwards. But they found the bone fragments from the fire pit where they tried to incinerate the body. They found all of the blood. They found all of the stuff. And they had arrested the girls, and they ratted him out. It's like, yeah, it was all his idea. And then he's like, really? Like, no way. Do they have all of that? He didn't admit to doing it, but like I just remember there being a look in his eyes. Some people would interpret it as the look of pure evil. Whether or not pure evil has a look, I don't know. Whether or not you're religious or not, I just know that when I looked in his eyes, in my head, I'm sure this must not have been it, but in my head, I'm picturing like black eyes, the way that you would see in the movies.
Yeah.
But it's just big, like huge pupils, like almost pure black, expressionless face. Like I'm not even talking to a human being. He's something else from the nether world of
He was
Hades.
What he was.
Yeah, he might have been. He might have been. Those are the three. Oh, that I haven't even got into the one that gave his stepdaughter an STD and got her pregnant.
Oh
I had a lot of bad clients in my career.
my. Yeah, and I mean, 2 of those have been criminal. I mean, those are, I don't do much of criminal, and
Yeah.
those are the worst.
Yeah.
So my stories are usually more of, I guess, drama and being upset and doing crazy stuff. Now that I remember, I had this domestic violence case where opposing party they were dueling restraining orders. Opposing party was hiding for service. So my dear client decided that she was gonna break into his business so that the alarm could go off and he will be called by the company to come to the building to see what happened, and that way she could have somebody serve him. I'm like, great. So you're breaking the law
Wow.
to try to serve. I don't know how that's gonna look.
Did it work?
Yeah.
I'm curious, actually.
No, because he sent his mom to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, off the top of my head, I think that's probably good service.
Yes.
I think it still works, you know?
It is still good service that you get in trouble for breaking in. I don't know. That's not.
Yeah, yeah.
It's trespassing, yeah.
Oh.
That was crazy.
Have you done one of these where you're at council table and the guy's avoiding service, but he shows up to the hearing and you say, hey, so this is yours.
Oh, yes.
And it's let the record reflect, Your Honor, that I have just served the defendant.
And then you say, no,
Respondent.
you cannot do that.
Oh, I just did. I believe I just did. If you want to avoid service, why don't you tell the judge?
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Oh, I've actually done that with their attorneys.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, but I don't accept service on behalf of my client. Like, Your Honor, she's obviously shielding her client from, you see what's happening. And then her client literally ran down the hall because she thought I was going to serve her in the hall. It's like, I don't even know what to say. You are a grown woman. You were in your 40s.
What are they going to attempt by avoiding it? Like, eventually you're going to get served, or the court is going to find that service was attempted, whatever, and it's going to go forward.
But then I just make a record. It's like, Your Honor, I just want you to understand that I literally just try to serve client or the other party right now, and you saw them actively evade service, you know, so whatever games they're trying to play, I'm asking for your permission to publish through publication, since they're obviously aware of the proceedings. They're showing up to court, and they're playing these games with service. But these are the fun, the criminal cases are the worst. I still do criminal cases. I haven't stopped doing them.
Yeah.
just not as much. I don't do any of those crazy cases that I used to do. But, most of our cases are in the civil arena, family law, probate stuff.
Yeah.
Not nearly as much fun as the criminal cases. Hence, we're talking about this Darrell Brooks guy.
Depends on who you're asking.
I guess it does.
Criminals sometimes is, I was telling Melissa earlier, I don't know why I find criminals sometimes boring, like the process itself. Like the law is interesting.
Criminal court?
Yes.
Yeah.
But the process, like going to court and having to wait, and the DA ignores you, or there's no DA,
Yeah.
and they take forever. Like I was in court this week, and judge decided to take all of the traffic matters first. So I was there like for 4 hours just sitting just to enter a plea, and I don't know, that bores me, and I guess that's why I usually just do like the small pieces, like special appearances, and then that's it.
Yeah, criminal court is very, well, I think it's a mentality. Do you guys know about the Stanford Project? The Stanford Project.
Sounds familiar.
I know you guys know about it. You have to.
Yeah.
It was either in the 60s or the 70s where they conducted an experiment, a psychological experiment at Stanford University,
Yeah.
whereby they were going to take these volunteers. Half of them were going to be labeled inmates, and the
Yes,
other half
there
were going
you
to be
go.
labeled correctional officers, right? And they were going to put them in a fake jail and no rules.
Okay.
Let's just see what happens. And so what happened was the people that were in authority started to take advantage of their authority
Yes.
and started to treat them as if they were actually prisoners, even though this was all pretend. And they started to, little by little, increase their advantage over these prisoners to the point where they were literally torturing or waterboarding of some of the inmates.
Oh
I
my
want to say
God.
that I read that. There was actually a movie on it about Netflix not too long ago. But yeah, it got pretty freaking wild. And the inmates were literally as if they're imprisoned. And the people conducting the study was like, oh, no, let them keep going. You know? Let's see what happens.
That's crazy.
I guess what they found out from that study is human beings, it's in our nature to abuse power. And I forgot why I started even bringing it up. What were we talking about just prior to the Stanford Project? Why did I even bring it up?
Just the criminal, like the
Oh, yeah.
court.
So think about the dynamics of a criminal courtroom. You have a judge. You have a DA that sits there all day long for every single case. They're usually talking to public defenders who are just as irritated with the clients as the DAs.
Oh yes, I saw that in the hallway.
Yeah, they have a certain rapport that they develop with the district attorney. So they're developing this friendship just by seeing each other every day.
Every day.
They despise private attorneys. I know that firsthand because I was an intern at the DA's office. And every time there was a private attorney, like there was this air of just despisement. Like I hate this guy. Like, oh, and it's always like he's getting paid thousands of dollars for this, and I'm sitting here paying my whatever, which is true. The DAs don't get paid anything. I think they max out. Well, I don't know what it is now, but when I was at one time thinking of becoming a DA, I think the max salary was $120. I don't know if that's still the case or not. That was years ago.
I don't know.
But yeah,
Never
they
looked
don't.
into that.
Compared to private defense attorneys, it's true. They don't get paid very much. Not at all.
And they work a lot. Like of course
They work a
might
lot.
get that max, but then
Yeah.
they're like, in the office like all day, whole night. It's
Yeah. And
crazy.
so you have that dynamic going on, and then you have the prisoners that are in there every single day. And you and I having both practiced criminal law, where we were making those jail visits and being immersed in that environment. It's not like family law where you get to sit and have a coffee with your client and talk about at length about your case. It's not like that at all. It's a lot more. Well, you're talking to a guy that's in shackles.
Yeah.
And you can't
Behind
even
a-
sit next to, like when you go into like one of the criminal courtrooms, no matter where it is, you always have to get permission from the bailiff. Could I go sit with my client, please? Or you got to go talk to them. And you're literally talking to them in this side room outside of the courtroom behind glass or plexiglass. But they're in shackles and an orange jumpsuit. And so impressions being everything, they're viewed as defendants, prisoners. And the reality of criminal law is most of the people are there because they actually did what they're accused of doing or something similar. there's not a whole lot of innocent folks in criminal court. That's been my experience.
Yeah.
The people that get charged with DUIs were really driving under the influence at the time of the arrest. The people that battered their spouse really did batter their spouse, and there's the bruises to prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, there's cases where
They get dismissed.
they're legitimately innocent, right? These are the ones that we take to trial, and, that's its own thing. But imagine that environment, and you're dealing with that every single day. Criminal court has a certain tenor to it that civil court doesn't have.
Yes.
That family court doesn't have, that probate court doesn't have, that dependency court doesn't even have, despite the fact that most people are in there because they lost their parental rights in some capacity. And so they treat you a certain way as if you were less than.
Yes.
If you're a private attorney, you're not part of the club. You're making you're making all these thousands of dollars, so, F you. You want your discovery, go get it downstairs. They'll literally say stuff like that,
Yeah. No, in that court, they don't want you to approach the DA. They make you sign a sheet when you go in.
Mm-hmm.
And they were supposed to go by the sheet. But what I have found is that depending on the DA, sometimes they don't follow that. And then you see other attorneys approaching, and I'm like, well, I'm on the list. You're not calling me. Like, what do I do? And then I approach you, and they ask you about the list. Well, you're not really following the list. Like, you're just talking to whoever comes to you. Like, why are you? It just drives me crazy.
Oh, I never got along with those DAs, especially in, I'm not going to name the courtroom, but I have a hate relationship with some of those DAs. Just because they try to treat you like that,
Yes,
like they're
they
big
do.
timing you, and they are disrespectful, and like you're bothering them to talk to them about the case that you have. Like,
Yes.
what do you want?
Exactly.
I want to talk about my client's case. What do you mean? What do I want? I stopped talking to them because the arguments that we would get into, it's like they're not listening to you at that point. So I tend to communicate with them through email.
Okay.
Prior.
Well, the ones that you can get an email address.
If you can get an email address. Because more often than not, it's like, well, it's not really my case. It's this other guy's. Oh, she just got transferred to Barstow, and so it's going to go to another DA. You get one of those, right?
Or it's not assigned yet.
Yeah. And I'm not saying this to disparage the DAs. I'm just saying there's good ones and there's bad ones. I have a lot of friends that are DAs, and they're really good DAs. But there are some DAs out there that really hate defense attorneys or their job or both or the defendants. And I get it. I mean, they deal with a lot of negativity.
Well, I've encountered some good ones, and I think maybe 2 weeks ago I was in court, criminal court, and there was one that, she was really nice. Of course, she was doing her job, and I was doing my job, but it was very cordial. But the majority...
Yeah, I get it. It's a tough job.
It is, yes.
But I feel like I've been in their position before. I've literally been the law clerk dealing with misdemeanors. Like, what do you got for me?
Exactly.
And then it's like, I want, and it's funny. All the defense attorneys come in with like this big pitch. I know what my guy did. I know what you guys have. I know it. But just hear me out. It's like, okay, what do you got for me? And so I've been on that side of it. And, it's annoying to listen to all of that. And you have to know too. It's like the DAs, they spend all day in trial. They have all these criminal cases that they try. And then all of the defenses are basically the same that they hear. Well, the officer didn't do his investigation. They try to set my guy up or this and that or chain of custody, whatever. They're always trying to fight off all of these loopholes. And that gets really annoying. I get it. It gets really annoying. And to the point where there's my favorite DA of all time. I used to love this one. I used to go to her and we would obviously go. She'd literally tell me, look, I'm not going to prosecute your guy. I'm going to give him, this is the offer. I'm going to dismiss the case. And why don't you go back and tell him how you were the big hero and got his case dismissed. Got it. Fist bumps. Boom. But she was cool like that. But then I've seen her with the other defense attorneys, and she'd be like, look, why don't you just tell me all about how my officer did a shitty investigation, and we'll go to trial, and you can show me how it was done. Done. And then the guy's like, yeah.
Exactly.
What there to say? What was there to say? He knows that he's coming with a frivolous argument, but what else does he have? And
there's ways to go around it, I think, because you can be straightforward and maybe like prevent them from, like you said, just going with the same defenses, but not being like rude for no reason.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
dismissing, like that's usually how, like just saying hi, it's like, what do you want? Like,
Yes.
you even say hi.
Yes.
That's the part that bothers me, and it's like so constant in that, I guess, arena, the criminal arena.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some really fun ones also. Interesting.
It goes to civility and decorum.
Yes.
I feel like as an attorney, especially in family law and in civil litigation, when I'm meeting with another attorney, I go out of my way to be cordial with them, to open up lines of communication, settlement. Like I just had a DV case the other day, and I just told the other attorneys, like, look, my client hasn't said anything. The only reason why there's a restraining order in the first place is because your guy did some crazy thing. If it's an isolated incident, just make sure he doesn't do it again. Chances are we might end up dismissing this thing if everybody just cools down.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, cool. Nobody's ever approached me like that, you know? It's always like, oh, whatever, I'm the big attorney and we're going to litigate and go to trial. It's like, okay, you want to puff out your chest? I guess we're going to go to trial and litigate it, and you were the one to... And it's not even like, it's an ego thing with most attorneys. It doesn't have to be that way.
Take
just
into
doesn't.
consideration, sometimes you are too nice.
Oh, I do, but
It helps them.
But if they don't return the favor, how often have you seen me in my office
Oh, none.
going up against other counsel that wanted to puff out their chest against us, and we had to, put our foot down on certain situations. And so, look, we could play that game. We could be adversaries, or we could work together, and we're prepared for both. And however you want to proceed is how we'll proceed. I wanted to talk about Darrell Brooks. I'm so not used to this setup. I usually have a clock right in front of me just to see how long we've been going. Apparently, we've been going for about a half hour. So the Darrell Brooks thing, one of the things he keeps on bringing up is subject matter jurisdiction, right?
Should take the bar.
Yeah, and so every time a witness would refer to him as Darrell Brooks, objection, Your Honor, I don't consent to be called by that name. Anytime everything happened, Your Honor, you still haven't proven subject matter jurisdiction. At the beginning of every hearing, at the conclusion, whenever they go to break, objection, subject jurisdiction has not been proven in this case, and they're just like, oh, I've noted your record many times, over and over. So they're playing this game. He thinks that it's somebody told this guy that if he declares himself a sovereign citizen, and sovereign literally means like you're a king. Like you're not, like you make rules, you don't follow rules, you're not subject. Like it'd be the equivalent of us telling China that they're under arrest by the laws of the United States. Well, no, we're not, because that's a sovereign country. So they just expanded it. I'm a sovereign citizen. I don't follow the rules of Wisconsin or of this courtroom, but I do accept that I have these constitutional rights that you must follow.
All the benefits.
Yeah, so every time they bring up subject jurisdiction in a criminal case, here's why it's a losing argument no matter when. If you were to go to Russia, either of you, girls or whoever, if you guys were to go to Russia and murder somebody, what are the chances are that you're going to get out of that murder case by saying you're an American citizen, not subject to the laws of Russia? Bullshit, because you were in Russia at the time, and they have said that you have committed a crime against us and one of our citizens, and we're going to hold you to account, right? So
There's that lady, that basketball player.
I was just gonna mention that. Yeah.
that,
Reiner,
Yes.
so, it's a perfect example.
she had a stash of weed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
The boy that took down the politics advertisements in North Korea, the American citizen.
Oh, I forget that guy's name. But yeah, for the same reason, we can't just go over there without declaring war to break them out of jail.
Yep.
Exactly.
You broke their rules. Hey.
One of his defense, or not his, but his attorney was that he was an American citizen, and North Korea was like, I'm sorry, but it happened here. That's
chose
it.
to come here.
And this is a crime.
So the courts, the federal government, the Constitution of the United States has given the states plenary power to assert jurisdiction over criminal acts committed within their four walls, meaning their borders. And so if you commit a crime in Wisconsin, you got to go to court in Wisconsin. You don't get to have the court heard in California. And they don't have to prove subject matter jurisdiction. They just have to make a finding that it exists. In subject matter jurisdiction, do you remember the two ways that you could get subject matter blah? Do you remember the two ways you get subject matter jurisdiction in a case?
Well, one of them, of course, is that if you commit a crime or something happens in the location. But
So there's different in criminal from civil, right?
Yeah.
So in criminal, you commit the act over there, you're going to jail here, and we're going to try you here. In civil court, there's two ways. I remember what they are. Girls, you know what they are?
No, we haven't passed the bar yet.
That's true. So you acquire subject matter jurisdiction if you were a resident of the place,
oh yes.
or if the incident occurs. And then the big famous bar question is, what if you're like flying above in the airspace of Oklahoma on your way from Miami to California, and what about then? And I'm not even going to try to answer that question. I don't care. I don't
Remember one of the
PTSD.
questions?
Yeah,
the typical, I think, I don't know if it was the bar exam or if it was one of the practice questions, but the guy that lives in TJ in Tijuana, Mexico, and then comes to San Diego for a festival, something happens, and then he goes back.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think there's actually a deal we have with Mexico where they will extradite that person back to the United States, and he will face the consequences of violating United States law, thinking he was going to be safe. There's no safe harbor policy for criminals between on the border.
I think they have it with Colombia too. Same thing.
Probably. I'm sure they do, because we're very much involved in all of their politics. And we have been for many, many years, for many reasons, illicit and not illicit.
Yeah.
So we are going to, at some point, discuss the OJ case. And I wanted to tease that segment for probably the next show. But we're going to do a deep dive into the O.J. Simpson case. And the reason why we're going to talk about it is because I had, by the way, I've been getting some feedback about the show. And girls, when you girls were involved, people really liked the Gypsy Rose segment because you guys brought that in and it was like, something that you wanted to discuss and you guys were involved and shared your opinions. And so we're going to keep that form. I think it worked out really well. But one of the things that they brought up is they were really curious about O.J. Simpson and why he was guilty in the criminal, or not guilty in the criminal and guilty in the civil, and what happened with the money judgment and the book and all this stuff and how all that works. And the way that all of that works is really 30 years of evolving law. Seriously. Some of it is pretty well established for hundreds of years, but the way that he shielded his money is pretty, it's interesting. I think it's worth a listen. Yeah, but back in 1994, I don't think that you girls were born yet.
I was not.
Yeah, Iliana, you would have been like 9 or 8 in 94?
Yeah.
I was 13. And I remember that year well. I was a big Raiders fan that year, and they were supposed to be like this amazing team and go to the Super Bowl. And I remember they started out 8-2, and then they lost their last 6 games and finished 8-8 and missed the playoffs. And I learned never again to trust the sports prognosticators when it comes to football. But OJ, at the time, was an employee of NBC Sports. He would commentate on football games. And when he would commentate, he would often be on the East Coast. Significant because one of the pieces of evidence, the gloves, he would wear every week in his football game broadcast. These Bruno Marley gloves or whatever they call Bruno something gloves.
Yeah.
But they were the same gloves. Wore them every single week. And that became a big focus of the trial. And then everybody remembers the famous, the glove doesn't fit. And if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. Rest in peace, Johnny Cochran. So I've actually heard from Christopher Darden, the prosecutor in that case, who introduced that piece of evidence. It was Christopher Darden who asked OJ to put on the glove. So if you are a trial attorney, you're trying to impress upon the jury that this piece of evidence is going to help convict or whatever. You have to know everything that's going to happen. You cannot leave anything to chance. And so he goes to try on the glove, and he may have manipulated his hand in a certain way or said, hey, it don't fit. I don't know what to tell you. Don't look it, it don't fit. Maybe it shrunk because of it was dehumidified or whatever. Who knows? But he got to put on this show as if this can't possibly be my glove. Never mind the DNA evidence. Never mind that he was pictured on video and all this other stuff wearing the glove. But it can't be my glove because obviously it's too small. And I know how to buy gloves, and I don't buy medium gloves, And, well, the case is legendary for that reason. But it's not the only interesting aspect of that case. And we're going to do a deep dive into it next week and get to some of the reasons why the criminal court found him not guilty. And you have to remember the climate of the time. I mean, we're coming right off of the heels of the Rodney King verdicts, LA riots in 92. People were pissed. The black community, the Hispanic community, things were rising like they were going to erupt. There was the LA riots, and now here you have the juice, and everybody's saying free the juice, and people wanted revenge. People think they had a lot to play out, had a lot to do with it. But it was a volatile time in LA history, and we're going to discuss. So we'll look forward to that for next week. But for this week, I've been having a lot of cases recently involving claims of a breach of fiduciary duty. And so these are some of my favorite kinds of cases. The family code that deals with breaches of fiduciary duties in 1100 subsection B and A, and in layman's terms, without going deep into the statute. Basically, if you're married to somebody and you have signed a marriage contract and you're going to be their spouse, you owe to your partner a fiduciary duty. And that fiduciary duty is, Pause for a minute. Pause. All right, we're back. We're back. Of course, we were going to have the technical issues when everybody's here in the room. So you owe your partner a fiduciary duty, which is it is a promise that you're going to do right by your partner and not deceive or do anything wrong by them, and it's of the highest order. It's a duty of care such that you're not going to transfer or sell or dispose of properties or do anything to diminish the community purposefully or recklessly.
Yeah.
And if you do, there's consequences to it. And usually the consequences revolve around forfeiture of assets, forfeiture of your share in community assets. It could be cancellation of purchases of real property. And in the case of Donald Sterling, it involved his mistress. Iliana, what do you know about Donald Sterling?
I don't know anything about him. I have just heard like bits here and there.
Yeah, you
in
probably
the news.
know the juicy bits, right?
Yes, exactly. The ones that pertain to family law. Like, oh, that was interesting, but I haven't heard much about him.
So,
but I like this subject a lot.
Donald Sterling married his wife in 1955, almost 70 years ago. He's a very old man. He made his money by purchasing low-income residential facilities and built himself an empire. He purchased the NBA team, the San Diego Clippers, in 1981. And then from San Diego, he moved them to Los Angeles, and they became the LA Clippers.
Okay.
Actually, I think they might have been called the Braves at one point. I don't know. But he purchased the team in 1981. Around the same time, Jerry Buss purchased the Lakers.
Yeah.
He was a very...
No, I'm thinking like I think there's going to be some changes.
Ignore the sports part of it.
Yes.
It's not important. What's important is that Donald Sterling was this very eccentric man. He was racist, outwardly racist. He was a complete and total douchebag. to everybody. He was famous for not paying his players, not paying his coaches, not honoring his contracts, evicting people in unsavory ways, and he was just a bad guy. Fast forward to 2013, 2014, and he got himself a mistress. And that mistress goes by the name of Stiviano. That was her last name. I forget how old she was. She was like in her 20s, I'm sure. Younger 20s, maybe late 20s. But he was an old man. I'm talking about pressing 80 years old. Now he's got to be close to like, he's got to be knocking on his 90s at this point. But I mean, he was really old. And at that point, there was some discussion that maybe he was kind of losing his marbles a little bit. Maybe age is starting to catch up to him. Perhaps, I don't know, he was losing it, right? But he had this mistress, and of course he did, because he was a billionaire. And he kept her company, and he would buy her things. He would buy her cars. He would buy her properties and houses, all from the community funds. Now, here's my opinion. You don't marry a man like that not knowing that he's engaged in those activities. There's no way you're going to keep that a secret for 70 years. And it was not a secret. He was doing that kind of stuff from the 60s onwards, probably into the 50s, who knows. But it was not this big secret, and his wife just kind of swept it on the rug. Why? Because her husband was a billionaire, owner of the Clippers, and so it was a trade-off. You do what you want to do, and I'm going to ignore it. I'm sure she probably did what she wanted to do too. Who knows? The point was, back in 2014, he got this mistress that he was seeing. Secretly recorded him in the privacy of his own home. So there's some, I have some questions about the legitimacy of those recordings, admissibility of. The admissibility doesn't matter because the NBA found out about it. And in these recordings, he was saying these grossly racist things that got out. And the NBA, trying to protect its image, was like, we can't have that. We can't have that. And so they essentially forced him to sell the team. The discussion at the time of his divorce in 2014, when they started initiating these divorce proceedings, was whether or not he committed a breach of fiduciary duty as it relates to his racist comments that caused him to be forced to sell the team. All of these property issues were addressed, whereby was the team in a trust? Was it purchased as a trust? Did it come from separate property? Was it, community property? What was it? How was the team held? One of the fiduciary issues was whether or not his actions causing them to sell the team was actionable in his family law case. The other issue that came about was the gifts that he gave to his mistress.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, the 2007 Bentley. There was a 2012 Mercedes-Benz. There was a property, a high-rise property in LA somewhere. There was all of this. There was a number of things totaling about $2.5 million. All paid out of community funds. And he didn't dispute any of it. It's like, did you give this girl $2.5 million? Yes, I did. And I'll do it again tomorrow, and I'm going to do it again next week. What you going to do about it? He's a billionaire. He sold the Clippers for something like $3.5 billion. And so it's not like he was put out of anywhere. The Clippers were bought for, at that time, what was a record price. And, they're doing well with their new ownership. But yeah, he was very much a combative old man. There was actually a documentary podcast about it by Ramona Shelburne that she put out for ESPN not too many years ago, where she highlighted a lot of the legal proceedings that were going back and forth. And look, they were a couple that they're just a weird old couple, weird old rich couple. They were interesting folks in the courtroom. And Donald Sterling, he didn't dispute any of these things. And so it's not like we had to litigate whether or not he gave these to his mistresses. Yes, I did. And you know what?
Probably proud of them.
Oh, yeah. Hey, yeah, I'm 80 years old, but I got money. And there's a dozen more like her, all willing to take this money, which, Jesus. But that's his, that was his position. So then the new issue became whether or not the mistress would be forced to forfeit the properties that were given to her, or she'd be able to keep them as, I guess, some bona fide purchaser theory of law. The answer, I actually have some of the case. And so some of the factual background on the case. And this case was heard right at Stanley Mosque. And this is what the law says about it. In Family Code Section 721. I need my glasses for this. I cannot even attempt. It goes on to say that Section 721B imposes a fiduciary duty upon transactions between spouses, and it provides in relevant part that in transactions between themselves, spouses are subject to the general rules governing fiduciary relationships. It goes on to say that the fiduciary obligation is also imposed upon transactions involving a spouse's management and control of community assets. And then it goes on to say, consistent with this general fiduciary duty, Section 1100 subsection B prohibits one spouse from making a transfer or gift of community personal property without the written consent of the other. And it states, in pertinent part, a spouse may not make a gift of community personal property or dispose of community personal property for less than the fair and reasonable value without the written consent of the spouse. But then it goes into these collection measures. Gifts or transfers of community personal and real property by one spouse without the written consent of the other spouse may be set aside. What does the set aside provision mean? It means that if you buy a house for your mistress, the court is well within its authority to quiet title as to the mistress and return the property back to the community. Under sanction principles and sanctions sections in Family Code, that may have the result of the person who breached their fiduciary duty forfeiting their share of the assets. So it's a $10 million house. The mistress loses it all. She doesn't get to keep it. She's not a bona fide purchaser, not as recognized by the law. So she forfeits it. It goes back to the community. And if he was entitled to $5 million, he may well just forfeit that entire $5 million. So the other party gets the other. Why were you so interested in this particular subject, Iliana?
Because, I don't see it with $1 million properties nowadays. My clients are more, I guess, have lower incomes. But I do see breach of fiduciary duty all the time. People just think that they can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And they're surprised whenever I tell them that this exists. And it's funny because they find out at the moment that they're going through a divorce. But, a lot of times, I find that these fiduciary duties, a lot of times it's more about making moral decisions and being logic, I don't know, rather than just knowing the law. Of course, you're not going to be buying a property for your mistress. Of course, that money belongs to you too. I don't know. But some people think that they can get away with it. And I don't know. I liked it a lot for some reason.
Oh, look at that. I just adjusted your volume and it worked out. What was I going to say? It's always the same. He used the community credit card to pay for the hotel rooms and I want that money back. And how much does a hotel room cost nowadays? $200-$300?
Yeah.
$400. So we're going to litigate this issue for $400. I've never actually taken that specific issue to trial.
No.
I have threatened it though. And people don't want that stuff getting out. Cases usually settle anyway when it involves that kind of stuff.
Most of the time, I think, at least in my cases, has been that the money that they are supposed to get back, it's less than they will need to pay me to litigate. So it's okay, do you want to pay me, I don't know, $5,000 to litigate $1,000? Where are we going to get it? So.
No, absolutely. That's how that works. It's oftentimes, there's legitimate breach. For example, if you're running a community business and then you put all of the surplus fund into Bitcoin and watched it drop from 58,000 down to 18,000 or whatever it is, it's arguable whether or not that is a breach of fiduciary duty. Honestly, in that case, I think that it would be just bad luck, tough luck investment. He was trying his best for the community. I think what happens is if you're doing it without knowledge of the other spouse, then it could rise to the level. But then the tribal issues become, how involved were you in the community finances anyway? And what level was your participation in these in the finances or the investments or whatever? So you can't just say, he's like, well, yeah, I left him in charge of all the finances and he lost all their money, so I should be reimbursed. And then it's like, well, what did you contribute? Did you let him do all of that? Did you give him alternate advice? Did you say, like, what's your role in all of this? And so it's not as simple as just saying, my husband made bad decisions or he spent money on a mistress or whatever. I need that money back. And the Donald Sterling case, it was that simple, simply because he didn't deny it. Yeah, I bought her a house, of course, with community money. We married this lady for 70 years.
And it was a lot of money.
Yeah, it was a lot it all came from the Clippers, purchased in 81, married in 55. It all adds up. So undisputed. I just think that it was interesting that she didn't get to keep any of the property. If I had not known about this case, prior to this case, my thought would have been that maybe she could keep the properties, but he is going to have to reimburse her from his separate property. Because she's sort of like it's not her fault. I mean, she got the gifts. What's she supposed to say? No, I can't. It'll leave me liable because you're married, and and nobody thinks like that in that situation. But that wasn't the case. She was forced to forfeit the properties altogether in order to pay Donald Sterling's wife. I forgot what it was. It was a little less than $1 million. And I'm certain some of the other money came from other sources. But that was the Donald Sterling case. And with that, we've been going solid for about an hour.
Okay.
And so I think it's time to wrap up. Did you have any parting words before we conclude episode 14?
Just not really. I can't think of anything. No parting words. I mean, no, nothing.
Okay.
Nothing.
Well, it's with that regard, I'll say all of our listeners, first of all, thank you for watching the show. If you're interested in watching the show, you can find us on YouTube. We do have a YouTube channel, and we upload every Friday, and with a new episode. In this episode, we are recording on a Thursday afternoon. It will be up tomorrow afternoon at some point. And for those of you listening by podcast, thank you for doing that. You can find us on any podcast platform that you listen to, whether it be Spotify or Apple Podcast or Castbox or Stitcher or anything. All of the major platforms. We will see you all again next week. And if you have any questions or anything that you wanted to address, as always, as you guys have done this week, by all means, write us directly. You can find Iliana on Instagram. I'm on Instagram somewhere. I'm not nearly as nearly as active. You could directly message us, and we will be happy to take your hypotheticals and address them on the show. And with that, we love you all, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for listening to the entire podcast. We really do appreciate that. And as always, you can find us on YouTube on the Tilted Lawyer Podcast YouTube channel or on your podcast carrier of choice. If you feel we've presented anything of value, please leave a 5-star rating, like, and subscribe. We always appreciate that kind of thing. And we do look forward to seeing you all again live every Thursday at 3 in the afternoon. We love you all. Take care. Bye-bye.